Good Monday morning. I'm Valerie Castro in for Joe Fryer.
Hey, everybody. I'm Savannah Sellers. Thank you for joining us right now on Morning News Now, face to face. Developing this morning, new video of Secretary of State Antony Blinken's high-stakes meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping on the final day of Blinken's visit to Beijing. What we're learning about their unscheduled meeting, the efforts to cool tensions between the two countries, and the global implications this all could have. Also this morning, ravaged parts of the South are dealing with the damage from a devastating and deadly storm. And the threat is not over. We have team coverage with a look at the areas hardest hit, plus where the system is heading next. President Biden is back on the trail for his re-election campaign. This morning, Biden is scheduled to make his way west after a weekend of events. This as former VP Mike Pence faces tough questions about his former running mate, Donald Trump, who's now his competition for the Republican nomination.
Will he accept defeat?
You
saw him once not accept defeat. Do you believe he will accept defeat in this primary if he does not have the most delegates?
I understand your preoccupation with my former running mate. And
He's
what
the
he
front
will
runner.
do or
It's not a
won't do
preoccupation. I have no choice.
We'll have more from his one-on-one interview on Meet the Press, including Pence's message to voters. And celebrating freedom on this Juneteenth holiday, we're commemorating the past while looking to the future. We'll talk to a descendant of activist Ida B. Wells about what the holiday means and how we can all honor her family's legacy. Plus, a candid look at the work that still needs to be done to help Black Americans in the healthcare system, and a lesson in forgotten history, how Black cowboys are saddling up and making space for themselves at the rodeo. That is the story that Valerie's going to bring us this morning. That is so neat. And it's good to be with you. Yes, happy Juneteenth to everybody at home. Thank you for joining us on this holiday. And we begin with that major news this morning out of China, this high-stakes meeting between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Chinese President Xi Jinping.
It's part of the second and final day of a critical diplomatic mission aimed at cooling relations between the world's two largest economies and rival military powers. During the meeting, Secretary Blinken said the U.S. and China have an obligation to responsibly manage their relationship and that the U.S. was committed to doing so, with both sides saying that talks have been candid and in-depth. Blinken is the first Secretary of State to visit China in 5 years, and he's the highest-ranking government official to visit the country since President Biden took office. The meeting comes after his February trip to China was postponed after a suspected Chinese spy balloon flew across U.S. airspace before being shot down by U.S. authorities just off the South Carolina coast. For more, we're joined by NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley. Matt, good morning. Thanks for being with us today. This meeting with President Xi was seen as key to the trip's success, but it wasn't confirmed by either side until shortly before it was scheduled to begin. So how did this all come together, and what can you tell us about this meeting?
Yeah, it was kind of a last-minute thing. And, the thing is that when we're talking about these two leaders, this was a trip that had been scheduled where we saw Antony Blinken, who was going to be meeting with his counterpart and with the top foreign policy advisor to the Chinese Communist Party. Those were two key meetings. They happened already. They lasted for hours. But that meeting with President Xi, that just wrapped up. Now, how we got to that, we don't have a lot of the background reporting on where that went. But this is a long time coming. This is months in the making. You mentioned back in February, that original meeting had been postponed because of that Chinese spy balloon that we devoted tons of coverage to. It was a really wild episode and one that just poisoned the water between these two leading global countries. And now it looks like what we're seeing is something like a détente. We don't know what was discussed or if there was any deliverables or if anything was actually agreed upon. But the important thing about this meeting is that it happened at all. And that's just what we saw, that there is still room for dialogue. Both parties are still willing to come to the table, and this could lead to higher level meetings, including between Biden and Xi themselves in China. Guys.
So, Matt, look, this, as we've been talking about here, you just touched on many of these things, but this comes amid such high tensions from that spy balloon, but then also to Taiwan, human rights issues, the war in Ukraine, a whole myriad of things. And so not a lot was necessarily expected to come from this, no real substantive change or anything like that. But we are hearing a little bit of reaction that we don't know details, just kind of commentary from both sides about this visit. What do we know at this point about what they're saying happened?
Yeah, I mean, both sides are, releasing statements saying that they were talking in terms that really just sound like a very sort of academic, almost ideological terms, sort of a clash of civilization, the responsibility that both leaders have, not just to their own publics in China and the United States, but to the entire world to de-escalate, or as the U.S. would call it, to defang the relationship between Beijing and Washington. That looks like it could have been successful, because what we're seeing right now in terms of the sort of competing statements or dueling statements out of this meeting, it looks as though both of them were really committed to trying to just lower the temperature between Beijing and Washington. And that's going to be crucial, again, not just to both countries, but to allies and enemies throughout the entire world who really are closely watching this relationship, because it does have knock-on effects for relationships and for other interactions internationally on the global stage throughout the entire world. So that's what makes this so crucial. But again, this meeting just wrapped up. It just happened. We don't know what was discussed really in detail, but there's going to be a lot of eyeballs and everybody's going to be listening to what was said. And again, the important thing was just that this happened at all.
Absolutely.
Guys.
A lot of details to still learn here. Matt Bradley, thank you for kicking us off this morning.
Staying in Washington, the hypothetical question of whether former President Trump should be pardoned if he's convicted in the classified documents case is dividing the 2024 Republican field. Meet the Press moderator Chuck Todd had Trump's former vice president and presidential hopeful Mike Pence weigh in on all of this. Here's Chuck.
Well, hello there, Savannah and Valerie. This week on Meet the Press, former vice president and current Republican presidential candidate Mike Pence joined me to discuss the former president's indictment in the classified documents case. Would Trump's former vice president pardon him if convicted? Take a look at what he had to say.
I just think the question is premature. I mean, honestly, Chuck, I've pardoned people who were found guilty of a crime.
What is your bar? What was your bar for a pardon?
Well, let me say first and foremost, I don't know why some of my competitors in the Republican primary presume the president will be found guilty. Look, all we know is what the president has been accused of in the indictment. We don't know what his defense is. We don't know if this will even go to trial. So I think, look, the president of the United States takes an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And as I said in my announcement, I'll always choose the Constitution. But the oath the president takes also requires him to see that the laws are faithfully executed. That means respecting the Article III courts in this country. I think we need to let the courts do their job and let this case work its way through our judicial system.
If you were President Biden, would you pardon him right now?
I just think this whole matter is incredibly divisive for the country. Look, I just think at the end of the day, it is saddening to me that we are now in this moment.
You can see a lot more of my interview with Mike Pence at meetthepress.com. You can get the full unedited version and other clips. You can also get a lot more of Meet the Press right here on NBC News Now, every single weekday at 4 p.m. Eastern.
Chuck, thanks so much.
Well, this morning, the 2024 presidential election is ramping up. President Biden will be back on the re-election campaign trail today, heading to California for a rally. Over the weekend, he held one of his first big campaign events since launching his re-election bid, touting his accomplishments at a rally of union organizers in Philadelphia.
We've created 13 million new jobs since I became president. That's more jobs in a little over 2 years than any president's created in one 4-year term.
For more, we're joined by NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray. Mark, good morning. Thank you for joining us on this holiday morning. So tell us, what was the president's message to supporters this weekend?
Yeah, Savannah, as you actually heard right there, it was touting his economic and legislative accomplishments, all in battleground Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, where he was getting the endorsement from the AFL-CIO all more than a year before the general election. But you're seeing President Biden, now that he has opened up his campaign, to kind of restart all of that energy and momentum heading into 2024. Savannah, another message was that he was contrasting his economic vision with Republicans, saying that he wants a fair tax system and wants to tax the rich, while Republicans want to maintain tax cuts for the wealthiest of Americans.
So, Mark, as we mentioned, I mean, this is kind of one of the first big stops we've seen the president make on the campaign, even though this is about 2 months after he announced his plans to seek that re-election. What is the strategy here? What do you think we're going to see going forward in terms of how the White House focuses their energy?
Yeah, it's still mostly a Rose Garden strategy where he is going to do mostly official events and keep the campaign off to the side. It's important to note that that rally to union supporters in Philadelphia wasn't really even paid for by the Biden campaign. It was a event where he ended up stopping. It was an actual union event where he ended up giving a rally. But we're probably not going to end up seeing the Joe Biden for president campaign stops for another year or so as the White House continues to focus on its business at hand. And in fact, today he's actually headed to California to speak about the environment, climate change, and energy jobs, but also raise money for his campaign.
Absolutely. Mark, quickly, I do want to ask you about the other side of things here. The president, you know, as he's promoting his economic message, his Republican rivals over on the other side, taking aim at his predecessor, of course, the current GOP frontrunner, that's former President Trump. And we're seeing this sort of delicate balance of them separating themselves after this indictment, but then also not wanting to alienate Trump's base of supporters and go after it too hard. What are we hearing? What's the latest here on how people are towing that line?
Yeah, it's important to note that we've now seen about 6 good polls taken since Donald Trump's indictment, and all show him with significant leads over his Republican competition. And when you are the front runner, you often end up getting attacked. Although the ones that we ended up seeing from the campaign trail some were very direct attacks and some were indirect. Take a listen to some of the attacks that Donald Trump ended up taking.
Donald Trump's position on the national debt is identical to Joe Biden's.
This guy is the worst manager in the history of the American presidency.
I think that he should drop out. Clearly, he's not going to. This is going to be decided by the voters.
We've developed a culture of losing in this party where we've had 3 successive elections with substandard results.
So Ron DeSantis didn't actually attack Donald Trump by name. He decried this culture of losing, and that was different from some of the other attacks that we heard from the Republicans as the Florida governor decides really not to go right at the former president of the United States.
Something we will certainly keep an eye on. Mark Murray, thank you very much.
From hailstorms and severe flooding in the southeast to a record-breaking heat wave in Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, millions of Americans are dealing with severe weather conditions. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson is in Perryton, Texas, one of the hardest-hit areas, with more.
Well, Valerie, good morning. As you can see, residents here in Perrytown are still digging through the destruction after that EF3 tornado bore down so quickly and so powerfully last week that officials here weren't even able to sound the alarms and warn people. And this is the kind of devastation that we're seeing in other parts of the South as well. Overnight, there were tornadoes that swept through Mississippi. And today, there are some 12 million people who are at risk for severe weather, including heavy rain, flooding, hail, and so certainly a lot of concern about that. And that comes after a weekend of bad weather, of rain, of more tornadoes, including here in Perryton. It actually stopped some of the cleanup efforts here because of that heavy rain that they were getting. And in addition to those intense storms, we're also seeing a lot of heat picking up here in the South. You have 31 million people in Texas and Louisiana who are under heat advisories this week. We're expecting triple-digit temperatures, record-breaking temperatures, and certainly just an incredibly difficult week when it comes to weather for the South after a weekend and last week of more intense weather. But I will tell you something here in Perryton, they are getting power restored. There are only around 400 residents without power in this county right now. And everywhere we go, we see people who are helping with those cleanup efforts. There are barbecue pits set up just about on every other block, offering folks free food. And so communities really coming together in this time to help each other out as they try to get through this season of bad weather right now. Valerie?
All right, just some devastating pictures there. Priscilla Thompson, thanks so much.
So where are the storms headed today? Let's get a check on your Morning News Now weather.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman is here with us. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning to you both. Great to see you. And yeah, we're still continuing to track severe weather, those dangerous temperatures in the south. So really a repeat performance of what we saw last week. We're already active on radar this morning. We've been watching this for hours. You can see really heavy rainfall. That's going to be part of it, too. We also have a tornado watch that is in the pink box. We have warnings as well. So really active starting out this morning. Normally it takes that daytime heating to get things going, but we're already starting this morning. This is a setup. We have an frontal boundary that's sort of parked over the area, or at least moving very, very slowly. It's lingering over the Tennessee Valley. It's bringing those severe storms likely along the Gulf Coast. And in addition to that, we could see up to 3-5 inches of rain. So that's going to lead to some flash flooding as well. Then look what happens tomorrow. It sinks slowly to the south, but not very fast. We're looking at training storms leading to localized flooding and also looking at 2 inches per hour. So as we go throughout time here, we're going to continue to track those storms. We're looking at severe weather threat once again today. I think this is like the 7th or 8th day in a row where we have the threat for severe storms. And we could see winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. Could see some hail and also the chance of a few tornadoes. Watching that very closely. 12 million people at risk. Also looking at some really heavy rainfall, especially in portions of the Gulf Coast. And we do have flood alerts. We have a flood watch that is in the green throughout portions of Mississippi and also Alabama. But where you see that flood warning, that's in the darker red. That means flooding is happening right now or it's imminent. Look at all that rainfall that we're expecting through Wednesday, locally 5 inches or greater. We're already saturated. We've been seeing that rain in days. And then we'll stop here because we're looking at millions under this heat alert. We're looking at heat advisories, heat warnings, temperatures in the triple digits. It's going to feel like 110 to 120 in spots.
Wow.
120.
I know. Oh, my goodness.
And it's been days. That's where it gets really tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And dangerous, right? All right, Michelle, thank you so much.
Coming up, it's the ultimate super commute. Later this hour, we'll talk to a college student who's choosing to fly hundreds of miles to her college internship to avoid paying rent.
First, though, after the break, Recaptured will take you to Ukraine, where officials are reporting significant gains in the counteroffensive against Russia. This is Morning News Now. We are back now with the latest on the war in Ukraine after a tough few days for President Zelensky's counteroffensive. NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez is in Ukraine and joins us now with the very latest. Hey, Raf, good morning. So tell us here about some of these significant gains that Ukrainians have made over the past several days, and then just kind of tell us how successful this counteroffensive has been so far.
Yeah, Savannah, good morning. In just the last couple of hours, Ukraine confirming its first battlefield gains in what's been a week of intensive fighting. The Ukrainians are saying that they liberated a small village near the Zaporizhzhia power plant, which we've all been so concerned about over the last couple of months. The blue and yellow flag going up over that village once again. But Savannah, we should be clear. This is a small village. It is not a major city. And this is a reminder that the progress here is slow. The Ukrainians are attacking heavily fortified positions. They are not taking ground as quickly as they would like to. Big picture, in terms of the overall success of this counteroffensive, it is really too early to say. We are a couple of weeks in to a campaign that both the Ukrainians and the Russians expect is going to be a long and bloody fight.
Absolutely, and that the Ukrainians ramped up for quite a long time. Also, Raf, I understand that strategy is changing here a little bit, using long-range weapons on the side of the Ukrainians. How effective has that strategy proven to be?
Yes, over the weekend, we saw the Ukrainians carrying out these long-range strikes. They were targeting largely Russian ammunition depots deep behind enemy lines, some of them in the direction towards Crimea. We saw some pretty spectacular explosions that you could just see from miles and miles around. The Ukrainian Air Force was really pleased with these results. We don't know for sure, but they may have been carried out with these British-made long-range Storm Shadow missiles. Ultimately, this causes a lot of confusion behind Russian lines. It mixes things up for Russian forces. But this counteroffensive is going to succeed or it's going to fail based on Ukraine's ability to get in close, to clear territory, and then to hold it. So this cannot be won with long-range weapons alone, Savannah.
Yeah. Finally, also, Raf, I do want to quickly ask you before we go. So over the weekend, we heard GOP presidential candidate Mike Pence say quite a bit. One of those things was going after his former boss, Donald Trump, over his position on this war. What did we hear?
Yeah, this is really striking. We are starting to see Ukraine emerging as a real dividing line in the Republican primary, and it's one of the areas where Mike Pence feels comfortable confronting his former boss. Take a listen to what he had to say about Trump's positions on Ukraine.
We did peace through strength. Now, my former running mate, seeing war raging in Eastern Europe, is signaling an ambiguous message, not even able to say who he would prefer to see win the war in Ukraine. Well, I think the United States needs to stand by the courageous fighters in Ukraine, give them the resources more quickly than Joe Biden has.
Now, Savannah, what you hear there is Mike Pence outlining a kind of traditional Reaganite conservative approach to foreign policy, which is very different from Donald Trump's more kind of transactional ideas. And as Pence said, Trump has not really made clear whether he feels strongly that either Ukraine or Russia should win this war. Savannah.
All right, Raf Sanchez, stay safe. Thank you very much.
And in other international news, it was a busy weekend for the British royal family as King Charles celebrated his first Trooping the Colours since his coronation. Plus, Prince William had a big announcement on Father's Day. Well, the royal editor of the British Sunday Times, Roya Nika, got that big scoop with the Prince of Wales. She joins us now with the highlights. Good morning, Roya. So before we get to your big interview, as we said, this was King Charles' first Trooping the Colours since taking office. How did it go?
Good morning. Well, it went really well. It was a very big day of firsts. It was the first King's birthday parade of the new reign. It was the first time we've seen a British monarch ride on the parade since the Queen, late Queen, last rode in 1986. And of course, wonderful celebrations, military might there, the household cavalry, the King's troop. It's a real spectacle here for the British public. And never complete now these days for the last few years without wonderful scenes of Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, who travelled in the carriage, watched proceedings, and then obviously went to the Buckingham Palace balcony with Kate there to watch the fly past. And there are always antics when Prince Louis is involved these days.
I was just going to ask you about that. It seems like he stole the show once again. What can you tell us about what happened?
Well, Louis seems to be developing this rather wonderful role in the royal family as the royal family's court jester. We saw it last year around the time of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. We saw it a little bit over the coronation, and he was absolutely loving Trooping the Colour. He was pulling all sorts of faces. He was holding his nose at one point. He was doing fist bumps. He's got this wonderful double-handed windscreen wiping royal wave, which he's developed. So he's great for us because there's always great pictures from my picture editor, and you just write to the pictures of Prince Louis. He's a real scene stealer.
I know everyone around him is so serious, and he just kind of breaks the ice. It's so much fun to watch. Yesterday was Father's Day, both here in the U.S. and the UK. Tell us about your sit-down with Prince William, about his new project, and how else the royals marked the day.
Well, it was a big deal for us and for me to get that interview because William's never actually done a sit-down with the newspaper before, and this is his first interview as Prince of Wales, as heir to the throne. We saw these lovely photos that they released of William at Windsor with his 3 kids, but the interview with me was really to sit down and announce these huge new plans he's about to unveil later this month on tackling homelessness in the UK. And one of the really interesting things that came out of that was his plan to put what we call social housing, what you guys call public housing, on his own private land on the Duchy of Cornwall estate. And he talked about the impact of his mother, Diana, because Diana used to take William and Prince Harry to homeless shelters from a very, very young age. And so this is a passion, a cause that he's very passionate about and has been since a young child. And he really wants to tackle it and will unveil big plans later this month to try and end homelessness in the UK. And it's had a lot of pickup here and around the world. And I think people think for someone who's the heir to the throne, if the government perhaps is not getting on top of it, it's a great thing for him to get behind.
All right, a problem that so many countries are struggling with. Roya, thank you so much. We appreciate you being here with us this morning.
And let's stay on even more international headlines. We're going to start in southern Brazil, where we're getting a look at the damage from a cyclone that killed at least 12 people.
NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman joins us now with more. Good morning, Josh.
good morning. In addition to those dozen fatalities, authorities say at least 5 people are still missing and nearly 3,000 have been left homeless. Emergency officials, they are still searching for those who may be missing or stranded by the floods. Now, it's too early to say what role climate change may have played in this specific incident, but the UN says that cyclones and hurricanes are getting more intense because of global warming. Now to the Vatican, where we just saw Pope Francis give his first speech since being released from the hospital on Friday. The Pope spoke from that window of the Vatican's Apostolic Palace. He was smiling and waving as he thanked well-wishers for their messages during his 9 days in the hospital. He's 86 years old, to remind people, and he just recovered from a major operation to repair a hernia. And finally, to China, where one young soccer fan has discovered that if you want to meet your hero, you better run fast. This young man, he managed to evade security and get onto the field at Beijing's Workers' Stadium long enough to give Argentinian soccer star Lionel Messi a hug. A shocked Messi embracing the fan who was wearing his own number 10 jersey. Eventually, security did catch up with the young fan, but the way he's running looks like he may have a soccer future himself.
I like how he just hugged him back. He's like, okay, I guess so. All right, Josh, thank you so much.
Coming up, a day of commemoration and reflection.
Up next, we have special coverage as we celebrate Juneteenth with a look back at the history of the holiday and as we look ahead to the work that still needs to be done. Stay with us. You are watching Morning News Now.
Welcome back. We're taking time this morning to honor and celebrate Juneteenth, the national holiday marking the end of slavery following the Civil War in 1865.
So Juneteenth, also known as America's second Independence Day, has been honored by Black Americans for decades, but it wasn't until 2021 that Juneteenth was actually recognized as a federal holiday by Congress. So many people are now using today's time off to reflect on racial tensions in this country and what can be done to achieve equality for all. So we are going to start this block here by taking a look at the health inequalities that the Black community faces.
According to a recent survey by the Kaiser Family Foundation, Black people are more likely to face financial barriers impacting their ability to receive health care. The survey also found Black adults are more likely than white adults to report being treated unfairly because of their race while seeking care for themselves or members of their family. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Uche Blackstock is here with us, author of Legacy: A Black Physician Reckons with Racism in Medicine. Dr. Blackstock, good morning. Thank you for being with us today. Your book, you discuss the racism that Black patients and physicians can face. You come from a family of physicians. Talk about some of the personal experiences that you've had with this.
Right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I will say that my experience is very rare in that I'm a second-generation Black woman physician, but I think that speaks to some of the systemic barriers in becoming a physician. I would say about only 5% of physicians are Black in the United States, even though we represent 13% of the population. And so that's because of systemic barriers like, exposure, representation, not seeing being a physician as an opportunity, also lack of generational wealth. You need resources to be able to get quality education and to pay for college and medical school. And then finally, I think mentoring, like we need to have mentoring programs in the communities, mentoring kids from nursery school to pre-K and giving them the support, social, emotional support to become a physician. We need all those resources poured into communities that have been disinvested in for a very long time.
Absolutely. Dr. Blackstock, it's so great to have you here today as a regular friend of the show, but also on Juneteenth and as someone who's such an expert in this area. So thank you so much. Let's talk some specific examples of these inequalities that we see, not just with the barriers to becoming a physician, to getting into this profession, but then what we actually see happening within care. I mean, I think COVID kind of did shine a light on this. We saw some of those disparities with the vaccine rollout, things like that, just access to care. We also know a huge and not talked about enough issue is maternal health and this mortality rate, especially among Black women. Walk us through some of these differences we see in care.
I would say even last week we heard about the death of a sprinter, Tori Bowie, 32 years old, and died at 8 months pregnant of eclampsia. And these are preventable deaths. That's the other thing. We know that in the U.S., Black women or Black pregnant people are 3 times more likely than their white peers to die of maternal death. And so a lot of that, there are different factors. people are not listened to when they go to report that they're having certain symptoms, they're having pain, they're having bleeding, right? Healthcare professionals are not listening intently and then acting upon that. The other issue is that a lot of these deaths occur in the year after giving birth. And so part of that is the kind of health policies that we have that only give, coverage for a certain amount of time, and people are not given appropriate follow-up care. So they're walking around with high blood pressure and they haven't gone to appointment. They've only had their 6-week postpartum visit. That's all that they're, qualified for. And then they end up dying from these, preventable causes. And so we have to think about a really holistic way of managing maternal health, that it doesn't just end once you give birth, that we have to follow these patients, make sure they're receiving the proper care.
Yeah. The proper follow-ups.
Yes.
Yeah. Historically, we know there's been a distrust between the Black community and the medical community. Is that still something that we're seeing play out today?
Yeah, I think so. Often the Tuskegee study is mentioned. So that was the, federally sponsored study from the 1930s to the 1970s of men in rural Alabama that were enrolled in the study, were not told that they had syphilis. And even once a treatment was discovered, they were not given that treatment. So they ended up dying from the side effects of syphilis, passing it on to their partners, and even having babies born with congenital syphilis. So people talk about that a lot. But I think even in current day, we see from some of the data that, Black patients just don't feel listened to, don't feel like their pain is properly treated. So I think that also engenders a lot of mistrust. And so I always say that it's really up to healthcare institutions to really be the ones to put, the first foot forward in terms of mending those broken wounds. Like, we really have to think about how are we engaging with Black communities? What are we doing to show them that we truly care very, very deeply about how patients do?
And I think that was one silver lining, at least, of the pandemic, was that actual active reach out that we saw a little bit there.
Yeah, and I felt even as a Black physician, that was our opportunity to reach out to our communities to say, hey, I know that you have this mistrust, but we are here to help you, and you need to get vaccinated. Yeah. This is going to help you.
Dr. Uche Blackstock, thank you so much. Always great to see you, especially great to see you today. We appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for coming. Well, now for something that you might not necessarily associate with Juneteenth, a rodeo.
A growing number of events are honoring the big part Black cowboys played in the Old West. We went along to speak to the organizers.
It has all the bulls, saddles, and spurs you'd expect, but this rodeo is a little different.
We're here doing an all-Black rodeo for the celebration of Juneteenth in Jacksonville, Florida.
The organizers exploring an important side of Black history that's not always in the spotlight.
We are teaching our history right here with horses and hats and boots. The Black American history was whitewashed. No one knows that the Lone Ranger was really a Black man, Sheriff Bass Reed. That's who the Lone Ranger is modeled after, but you would know that because they whitewashed it. There's thousands of other Black cowboys that contributed to the Old West that you never know about.
Historians quoted by the Smithsonian estimate as many as 30% of cowboys in the late 1800s were Black.
When the soldiers went off to war, guess who was left to tend the ranches? It was our cowboys. You have people like Bill Pickett who just figured out how to ranch with cows a little easier.
And by highlighting their past, rodeo organizers hope to create a more inclusive space for the future.
For people that look like me, it is a difficult thing to see us represented. I was that kid that wanted horses and I wanted to show, and I didn't see anybody like me. So now our kids can come and see that there are cowboys and cowgirls are in all shades.
They're paving the way for young cowgirls like Shaylin Williams.
I just wanted to do something funner with horses.
Her coach, Ingrid Douglas, now runs an organization that encourages kids of all backgrounds to get involved in rodeo.
We want to bring them together with agriculture and horses and animals, and it just makes a wonderful, diversified event.
As for Shaylin, she's thinking about her upcoming barrel race.
Just feeling like I just need to focus and try my best.
What a neat story, Valerie. Thank you so much for bringing that to us. We're going to continue our coverage now with Michelle Dester. Michelle is the descendant of activist and journalist Ida B. Wells. She's also an educator and an author, her most recent book being Ida B. Wells' Voice of Truth. Michelle, good morning. Thank you so much for spending this morning with us. We appreciate you joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I know your family has been celebrating Juneteenth long before this was declared a national holiday just a couple years ago. So tell us, what does this holiday mean to you? How can all Americans honor the legacy of Juneteenth today? Really spend the time in the right way.
Right. Well, I mean, for me, Juneteenth is a time for reflection on where we have been in our country and where we are today. And I think people can spend the day thinking about the true promise of this country and enjoying family, friends, and community.
As we mentioned earlier, your great-grandmother is activist Ida B. Wells. Walk us through her legacy for those who might not be familiar with her impact on American history. And what do you think she would say not only about Juneteenth, but about the racial reckoning the U.S. has seen in the last few years?
Well, my great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells, was a journalist, she was involved in the suffrage movement, and she was a civil rights activist. And she used journalism as a form of activism in order to fight for freedom, justice, and equality.
It's incredible to hear you just say my great-grandmother. So it's so cool to have you with us today and talk about this. Michelle, I do want to talk about a tweet that you wrote over kind of something that's going on right now over the weekend. This is calling out, here it is on our screens, how much work still needs to be done in this country. It says, is Juneteenth the only federal holiday that some states have banned the teaching of its history and significance? What do you make of these bans?
I think they're very unfortunate because African-American history is American history, and people cannot understand what this country is without learning about the experience of African-Americans.
Absolutely. Education and knowledge of this is so important. Michelle Duster, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
We want to continue our Juneteenth coverage by examining how Black Americans are being represented in the media. From the silver screen to radio waves and podcast channels, most feel they are not being accurately portrayed in pop culture.
Yeah, in fact, recent polling from the National Research Group shows that 67% of Americans feel there needs to be better representation of Black people in the media. Another 74% say inclusive content is a major factor in how they choose to consume media. We have Raquel Gates here to break this all down for us. She's an associate professor of film at Columbia University. Raquel, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on this Juneteenth. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So let's start with just some of the basics here and just talking about why representation in media matters so much and what we are seeing in terms of the lack thereof.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that historically, especially African Americans, but lots of marginalized groups have been represented in these really limited sort of stereotypical ways. And what we're seeing now, hopefully, are sort of more nuanced, more complex realities that are being depicted on screen, which is important for audiences to find stories that really resonate with them and with their experiences.
How has representation changed over time, and has it changed enough at this point?
Well, I think that, again, historically, I mean, especially Black people were really pigeonholed into these very limited tropes that were pretty much designed by and for white people. And, of course, Black performers have always sort of found ways to complicate those and to bring creativity, but still, it's difficult to do, right? I think that we're seeing a change, but I actually argue that we're seeing a little bit of an overcorrection now. So we see sort of overly positive representations to sort of counter the effects of those earlier ones.
So given that, if we're kind of seeing that overcorrection, then what is that sweet spot, I guess? And what do you think is kind of still missing, or what maybe needs to be tweaked about this representation?
I mean, I think my greatest hope for film and for media representation is that we get to see Black people in all of their complexity and all of their nuance, being messy, being multi-layered, and being fully human. And I really am excited about sort of the promise of something like, I don't know, Across the Spider-Verse, right? Which is taking sort of the beauty and the magic of 2D animation to really show what it means to be an adolescent and an adolescent, Black boy growing up in New York City with all of those experiences.
I think it's also important what we said at the beginning here, that this is an active part of how people choose content that they're going to consume, right? I mean, that's important for these production houses, these companies to hear and understand.
Yes. No, absolutely. I mean, I think we've talked a lot about this in our society in terms of representing reality, but I also think that companies have the opportunity to sort of envision the reality that they would like to see. And if there's any place that can do that, that's cinema, that's media, that's television.
And it sounds simple maybe, but what does it do to be able to look at the media and see yourself represented there on the screen?
Well, I think that people are always looking for representations, maybe not of their exact sort of selves, but of their experiences, of their emotions, of things that they know to be true, but sort of don't see reflected anywhere. And I think that that can be a really validating experience for viewers.
Raquel Gates, thank you so much for joining us on this Juneteenth and having this conversation with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Something to think about during the commercial break. Would you travel hundreds of miles for work to avoid paying thousands for a place to live?
When we come back here on Morning News Now, we will introduce you to a summer intern choosing to make that mega commute instead of paying a mega rent. We will be right back. Welcome back. A University of Virginia student is going the extra mile or miles to be able to hold down a summer internship. Sophia Celentano flies 600 miles a week from her parents' house in Charleston, South Carolina, to her internship in Parsippany, New Jersey.
It's part of a bigger trend called super-commuting, traveling 90 minutes or more to get to work. And Sophia says it's paying off. She estimates she'll save at least $2,000 this summer by not having to pay rent. Sophia joins us now. Sophia, good morning. You've been doing this for about 2 weeks now. How did you come up with this decision? And does anyone else in your family super commute?
Actually, yes. I've grown up seeing both of my parents super commute. They have jobs that are based in the Washington, D.C. area. And a few years ago, they moved to Charleston, South Carolina because they've always wanted to move here, but never really had the opportunity until COVID happened and their jobs became remote. So I've seen the flexibility that provides them to their lifestyle. They love their life here in Charleston, and once a month they'll go up to DC and get their in-person meetings done. So I've seen how living right by your office doesn't necessarily need to be necessary to have a successful career. So I think I definitely got inspiration from my parents with this.
So, Sophia, explain how this works. So if I understand it correctly, I think it's that are you in office 1 day a week? So essentially you don't have to pay any money and you don't ever really stay over in New Jersey. You fly in and out. And so essentially your costs instead of rent are just those 2 flights a week, basically?
Yes, exactly. My internship is hybrid. So all other times other than 1 day a week, I'm working remote 9 to 5, and then 1 day a week they have us come into the office just so we can connect with each other in person. And that's exactly right. I fly in the morning really early, get to the office by 9, and then I'm on my flight out at night, so I don't have to pay for any hotels.
And does your work know that you're doing that? I mean, now you've gone so viral, they probably do, but did you have this conversation with them, or is it just kind of under the radar because you only have to be there once a week?
Yes, well, on the first day, we were doing our icebreakers and everyone was saying where they were coming in from. And I mentioned I was coming in from South Carolina. So I became really well known really early because of my commute. And a few days later, my TikToks really started to get a lot of attention. So my coworkers have been really excited for me. Throughout this whole process, my managers have been so supportive, just navigating all this newfound attention, and I feel really lucky that my company has been so nice throughout this process.
Yeah, it's definitely not a secret anymore. You said that you having a longer commute has helped you have a healthier work-life balance. How does that work out, and what's been the hardest part of this commute?
I think commuting definitely provides me with a lot more flexibility to my lifestyle, especially with the fact that I'm able to be at home with my family this summer. I usually am going to school out of state, so I don't really see my family that often. So when I was thinking of where I wanted to be this summer, if I was able to be at home with my parents, that sounded like a great opportunity, and I wanted to make it work in whatever way I could, even if that meant I had to be on a plane 1 day a week. With that being said, it has had its challenges. I think the most difficult part has been the unpredictability of airline travel. When the Canadian wildfires happened a couple weeks ago, my flight home was delayed by an hour, which was obviously unpreventable. And then my flight last week was also delayed, and I had some issues there. But luckily, my flights in the morning are usually on time, if not landing early. So I haven't been late to work any of the days I've commuted. And this was something I sort of signed up for when I decided to commute. I knew airline travel was pretty unpredictable, and I knew I was going to be at the airport at weird hours. But all in all, I think the pros outweigh the cons.
I love how you call it your 3 to 9 before your 9 to 5. Wow, what a long day. So cool. And I mean, viewers can probably see at the bottom, it sounds like you think you'll save at least $2,000 this summer. That's awesome.
That's incredible. Sophia Celentano, thanks for joining us, and good luck this summer.
Yeah, enjoy your internship.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, now to a heartwarming story that shows the power of mentorship. Elementary and middle school students in Maine are learning how to master the game of chess. Their coach, the school's custodian, and he's leading them straight to victory. NBC News correspondent Kristen Dahlgren has this story.
At the end of the school day in Hampton, Maine, custodian David Bishop puts down his mop.
That was key right there.
And starts teaching these kids to clean up the competition. Meet this year's Maine elementary and middle school state chess champions, coached by none other than their school janitor.
Well, it's kind of cool that a janitor has a whole different life.
It sounds like something straight out of the Queen's Gambit.
It's called chess.
Will you teach me?
For Bishop, yes, that is his real name, none of this was expected.
You can't take this because it's pinned.
When he found himself out of a job after a career in telecommunications, a friend hired him as a custodian. Then he happened upon the school's chess club.
And I asked permission to join and just to help the kids.
Now the team is stronger than ever. Checkmate! With top 15 finishes at nationals. But Bishop isn't done.
You have that twinkle in your eye. What's the goal here?
Well, win the nationals. We can do it. I think we can.
What's the most important lesson he's ever taught you?
When you find a good move, make a better one. I think that can translate even to life.
Sometimes you find exactly what you need.
I'm grateful that no company wanted to hire me for a telecommunications job. Thank you for that, companies.
In the most unlikely places. Kristen Dahlgren, NBC News, Hampton, Maine.
What a cool story. Bishop, are you serious? That's his name? Awesome.
Coming up, grab your paddles. We're going rafting.
When we come back, we'll show you how California's record snowpack has created the perfect condition for thrill seekers along a popular river. That includes our friend Gotti Schwartz. This is Morning News Now.
Welcome back. Netflix has released details on the second season of Squid Game. The South Korean thriller became a global hit in 2021 and won a string of Emmys. A trailer for the second season was released over the weekend showing that Lee Jong-jae will return, as well as the masked frontman character and, of course, the creepy red light, green light doll. There's no date for this release yet, but it is expected in 2024. Savannah, did you watch the first season?
I did, and I know it was like totally creepy, but I liked it. I don't know what that says about me, but I mean, the whole world seemed to like it. What, did you watch it?
I did not, but wasn't it really violent?
It is.
Okay, I think that's what threw me off about it. So I don't know if I'll watch this next one.
That's true, but there's, I don't know. It's just, you gotta watch it to be in the conversation, you know what I mean? All right, thanks, Valerie. We end this hour with a cool story. Remember how California's Sierra Nevada mountains saw more than 50 feet of snow over the winter? Well, now all that snow is melting, and it's creating the perfect conditions for whitewater thrill seekers. NBC News Now anchor Gotti Schwartz headed up to the mighty Kern River to see what it's all about.
All across the Sierra Nevadas, this year's record-breaking Whitecap Mountains means record-breaking whitewater below.
It's gonna be sick. It's the biggest I've ever seen it.
And this season, the most extreme boaters are talking about the mighty Kern River that's come roaring back to life.
There's whitewater kayakers from all around the world coming to enjoy this year. Raft guides from all around the world.
I came from Kentucky, baby. I'm chasing this water. Found my way out to the Kern, never looking back.
Last year, the historic drought dwindled water flow here to a trickle.
You literally could not get a raft down.
As rafters will tell you, 700 cubic feet per second. But this year, it's around 7,000.
So the river is running 10 times higher than it was last year.
Yep, 10 times higher, which is insane. So we're doing some serious rafting today. It's no joke. The river's moving fast.
The flow is so huge that our guide company, Sierra South, won't let anyone on Class 4s without a Swiftwater swim test that we have to take in 40-degree water that was snow just yesterday.
So let's go ahead and put our paddles into the boat. Paddles in. All right, here we go. Swim upstream and upstream. That's so cool!
Nice. Yeah! Nice. Great job, everyone.
Dude, you're so warm.
The bear hug, an added bonus. But the moment of truth?
Did we pass?
Awesome. Yeah, you guys passed. Perfect. Perfect.
Oh my God, that is so cold! Nothing like whitewater in the morning to wake you up.
We load up and head out for the bigger stuff.
We have two big waves at the bottom that we got to make it through.
How big?
The bottom, like the biggest wave on this whole rapid is over 10 feet tall.
Let's go, 4, 2.
Good, stop, and forward.
Going, yeah!
lived along the Kern River their whole lives, like our guide Evan Moore, have never seen their beloved river running so high. And if you're wondering about his experience, not only is he one of the greatest kayakers in the world, when some kids were riding their bikes to school,
we kayak to kindergarten rather than ride your bike. He's been on the water since his first 6-day raft trip. He was 2.5 years old.
The OG in these parts is Evan's dad and co-owner of Sierra South, Tom, who up until recently always had one up on the youngins.
Back in '83, 40 years ago, it was about a 300% year. I've had this over these guys for 40 years.
But now 2023 is the year to beat, with Kern flows the likes of which no boater here has ever seen. Gotti Schwartz, NBC News, Kernville, California.
Leave it to Gotti.
What an assignment.
To scare us in the morning. He loves it, though.
That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now. Stick with us. Good morning and happy Juneteenth. I'm Savannah Sellers.
And I'm Valerie Castro in for Joe Fryer. Right now on Morning News Now, a new swath of severe storms striking the South. This morning, hundreds of thousands of people from Texas to Tennessee are waking up without power as driving rains, scorching heat, and powerful winds battered communities that are still reeling from last week's storms in Texas that left 5 people dead. We've got the latest on this track of new round of storms, plus a coast-to-coast look at your week ahead. Overnight, a Beijing rendezvous. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met face-to-face with China's President Xi Jinping, all part of a high-stakes overseas summit looking to cool recent red-hot tensions between the U.S. and the People's Republic. We'll take a look at what's at stake and if this meeting helped make any progress. Also this morning, the race to reopen, round-the-clock efforts to repair the vital stretch of one of the nation's major travel arteries in Philadelphia after that stunning collapse just over a week ago. We'll take a look at the expedited reconstruction plan that Pennsylvania's governor says could have traffic back up and running again in weeks instead of months. And on this Monday morning, we're celebrating Juneteenth. We'll take a closer look at what freedom truly means for millions of Americans and the eclectic culture of song, dance, and, of course, food that's taken shape over hundreds of years. Looking forward to that today.
Absolutely, yes. And again, happy Juneteenth to those of you at home.
We begin this morning with the millions of Americans dealing with severe weather. Parts of Florida are expected to receive more than 7 inches of rain. Meanwhile, in neighboring Louisiana and Mississippi, a record-breaking heat wave is causing problems for the region's power grids.
All of this is as residents in Texas are cleaning up from a deadly tornado that touched down over the weekend. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson is in Perryton, Texas, which was one of the hardest hit areas, with the very latest.
Well, as you can see, residents here in Perryton are still digging through the destruction after that EF3 tornado bore down so quickly and so powerfully that officials weren't even able to sound the alarms. And today, people across the South are dealing with more devastation.
Overnight, homes leveled as a tornado ripped through part of Mississippi. The Southeast pummeled by another round of summer storms. And 12 million Americans across the South at risk today. It comes after a weekend of walloping weather.
It was like rumbling. You could hear stuff cracking, breaking.
Reports of at least 14 tornadoes touching down in 9 states, killing 5. From intense storms to extreme heat, some 31 million Southerners remain under heat alerts as record-breaking triple-digit temperatures grip the region. Meanwhile, residents in Perryton, Texas are still digging out of the destruction. Saturday's storms dealt another blow to the tiny town, just days after an EF3 tornado leveled more than 200 homes and businesses, killing 3 people. The weekend's downpour brought cleanup to a halt for residents like Oscar Hernandez, his 4 businesses destroyed by the tornado.
How are you doing emotionally right now?
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
But some relief for the devastated town. Texas Governor Greg Abbott on the ground Saturday, signing a disaster declaration and promising help to rebuild. Amid so much uncertainty, a community coming together, inspiring hope in those like Oscar, determined to find a way forward.
And we're seeing so much of that resilience throughout this community. There are dozens of volunteers, many of them with barbecue grills set up to make sure that folks, as they're cleaning up, can come and get a hot meal. And the other big concern here, in addition to the debris removal, is electricity. And as it stands right now, there are only a few hundred people without electricity, and crews are out again today working to restore that power. Back to you.
All right, Priscilla Thompson, powerful reporting. Stay safe. Thank you.
Let's get a check at your morning news now weather.
And let's see what else is in store here. Joining us, of course, is Michelle Grossman with that forecast. Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Hey there, guys. Great to see you. And unfortunately, it's more of the same. We are still tracking severe storms. We've been tracking them since really late, early last week, really the weekend before, actually. And we're going to continue to track storms all throughout this week. That's one big weather story. We're also tracking some really dangerous heat. We're looking at temperatures soaring into the triple digits. You factor in the humidity, it'll feel like 110 to 120. So those are the two big weather stories. In addition to the severe weather, we're tracking heavy rain. So we will have flooding concerns as we go throughout today, tomorrow, also Wednesday, and into Friday. So cool and soggy in the northwest. We're looking at higher elevation snow, if you can believe that, in some spots. Dry and warm in the southwest. We're dry, too, in the middle of the country, the Central Plains, looking at temperatures in the 90s and also lots of sunshine. This is Wednesday, still stormy in the southeast, extending all the way up to portions of the mid-Atlantic. You notice these darker colors, especially around the Carolinas into the southeast. That's where we could see some flooding concerns. We've been seeing rain day after day after day, so we're going to continue to add to that. Still hot. That heat wave does continue in the south. Chance of showers in the northern plains into portions of the central plains and also parts of the Intermountain West. Still dry in the southwest, still warm also. And then as we near Friday, we're going to kind of continue that same pattern. So as we look towards the east, we're looking at lots of rain from the Ohio Valley over to the northeast, to the southeast. A flood threat continues because we're looking at heavy rain continuing. These are like really summer-like storms. It's almost like a sponge. You wring it out and you get that heavy downpour. A bit cooler, but still really warm in the south, just not quite as hot as it has been by Friday. Sunny and seasonable in the southwest, and still more rain in the Intermountain West, stretching to portions of the upper Midwest and also the northern plains. Let's start with the heat because 31 million Americans are impacted by this dangerous heat. This is going on, and that's when it gets really taxing on your body. We do have excessive heat warnings. That is in the pink. So Austin, Dallas, Houston, Del Rio, Corpus Christi, we will see those temperatures once again climb into the triple digits. Look at these numbers. 113 in Laredo. That will probably break the record of 112. 107 in Austin. You could break a record, too, of 105, 101 in Houston, 106 in Abilene. That's today. Tomorrow, no relief. We're looking at temperatures still into the triple digits. Laredo, 112, the record of 109. Waco, 103. Wichita Falls, 104. And this heat is going to spur some storms. It already is spurring storms. Early this morning, you notice this pink box. That's a tornado watch box. And we're probably going to see this as we go throughout the day because we're looking at those strong storms already. Severe thunderstorm warnings. And notice all these bright colors. That is heavy rain falling. And that's where we're looking at the chance for some flooding as we go throughout today because we're just going to add to that. Flood alerts are in place. We have a flood watch in the green. We have flood warnings. That's the red. That's where flooding is imminent or is happening right now. Severe weather threat, 12 million at risk. This is day after day of millions of Americans being at risk for severe storms. Winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. Could see some hail, a few tornadoes as well. And then, of course, it's that really heavy rainfall, too.
113, 114 on the map.
So early in the season, it's
wild.
been day after day, and that's for your body. You kind of get that weather fatigue, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of other stuff going on. Juggling a lot. Michelle, thank you so much.
Sure. This morning, with the start of summer just a few days away, the presidential campaign season is already heating up. President Biden held his first 2024 rally this weekend. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, some candidates escalated their criticism of GOP frontrunner, former President Donald Trump. NBC's Garrett Haake has the latest from Washington. Garrett, good morning.
Hey, Val, good morning. Yeah, summer just getting started, but only 500 or so days to go until Election Day. And now we've got some Democrats breathing a sigh of relief at President Biden's re-election campaign, really ramping up this weekend as Donald Trump continues to consolidate support on the Republican side despite all his mounting legal challenges.
President Biden kicking off his re-election campaign in Philadelphia.
Hello, organized labor.
Rallying union workers, the president pointing to progress on the economy.
We've created 13 million new jobs since I became president.
Still, the president is facing political headwinds as he campaigns for a second term, with a recent poll showing Mr. Biden with a narrow 4-point lead over former President Donald Trump in a possible 2020 rematch. Mr. Trump remains the overwhelming Republican frontrunner, nearly a week after pleading not guilty to 37 federal criminal charges tied to his handling of classified material at Mar-a-Lago. Some of his GOP rivals have suggested they would pardon the former president if he is convicted. But Mr. Trump's former Vice President Mike Pence telling Chuck Todd such discussions are premature.
I don't know why some of my competitors in the Republican primary presume the president will be found guilty. Look, all we know is what the president has been accused of in the indictment. We don't know what his defense is. We don't know if this will even go to trial.
Other Republican candidates are sharpening their attacks on Mr. Trump, especially former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, arguing Republicans will go down to defeat if the former president is the party's 2024 nominee, a message he says he'll deliver in the GOP debates.
I will do what I need to do to be up on that stage to try to save my party and save my country from going down the road of being led by three-time loser Donald Trump.
Echoed by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who argues the GOP must move on from Mr. Trump without mentioning his name.
We've developed a culture of losing in this party where we've had 3 successive elections with substandard results.
Now, the big focus on the campaign trail the rest of this week isn't so much campaigning as it is just raising money. The First Lady, the Vice President, and the President all fanning out across the country for high-dollar fundraisers this week, with President Biden headed first to California today. Valerie?
All right. Garrett Haig, thanks so much.
Well, there are major new developments this morning out of China. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with China's President Xi Jinping earlier this morning during a visit to Beijing. The meeting was part of a 2-day diplomatic mission to try to ease tensions between the two countries following a string of high-profile conflicts. NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell has the latest.
Good morning. This is all developing, and it is a diplomatic tightrope walk for Secretary Blinken. Building up to today's 35-minute session between Blinken and President Xi, Blinken held hours of what officials call candid and direct discussions with other top Chinese leaders. Now, the expectations are limited. The U.S. goal is to stabilize a relationship with China that had taken a serious turn for the worse. The world watching a high-stakes meeting this morning as the U.S. works to pull relations with China back from the brink. Secretary of State Antony Blinken face-to-face with Chinese President Xi Jinping today in Beijing.
President Biden asked me to travel to Beijing because he believes that the United States and China have an obligation to responsibly manage our relationship.
Blinken, who's been holding marathon sessions with other senior Chinese leaders, is the highest-ranking U.S. official to visit China since President Joe Biden took office, and the first Secretary of State to do so in 5 years.
It's in the interest of the United States, in the interest of China, and in the interest of the world.
Frayed relations surround issues from the status of Taiwan to human rights and trade. But officials say the U.S. goal is about signaling to the world that the two superpowers can work together after months of escalating tensions and incidents, including when the U.S. shot down that Chinese spy balloon off the Carolina coast earlier this year. Followed by a series of close calls. This month, the U.S. releasing video showing a Chinese warship nearly colliding with an American destroyer, coming within 150 yards. Blinken and President Biden waiting to see if China will agree to lower the temperature. Today's diplomacy is a necessary step toward any future meeting, maybe even conversations between President Biden and his Chinese counterpart. The president has stressed his desire to harness his long personal relationship with Xi, but so far that has been sidelined by conflict.
All right, Kelly, thank you so much.
Back here at home, Pennsylvania officials have announced a new timeline for repairs to the collapsed portion of Interstate 95. Initial estimates had the overpass fixed months from now, but drivers could be back on the road in just a few weeks. Commuters now breathing a sigh of relief as the expedited construction continues. NBC News correspondent George Solis joins us now from that construction site in Philadelphia with the details. George, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Valerie. Yeah, this 24/7 operation kicking into high gear with the promise from Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro that cars could get on the road here within 2 weeks. The governor making the promise alongside President Joe Biden, who was in town this weekend, and says there is no more important project going on right now.
This morning, the race to get traffic moving on one of the nation's major Northeast highways is on.
I can state with confidence that we will have I-95 reopened within the next 2 weeks.
Over the weekend, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro vowing to get the job done in record time. The incredible pace coming just over a week since a crucial stretch of Interstate 95 in Philadelphia collapsed after authorities say a tractor-trailer hauling more than 8,500 gallons of gas flipped over an off-ramp and caught fire. The resulting explosion causing the northbound lanes to buckle and damage the southbound lanes beyond repair. The initial estimate to reopen the road was months. Now,
and we are getting it done here in Philly.
The governor making the stunning announcement alongside President Joe Biden, who took a helicopter tour of the site during a campaign stop.
There's no more important project right now in the country as far as I'm concerned.
Crews have been working around the clock to demolish and begin to rebuild the interstate, with the plan for now to build 6 temporary lanes. This past week, the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation also launched a 24/7 live stream of repairs with thousands tuning in daily.
Traffic be bad, so if you gotta get to work, you might gotta leave an hour earlier.
An estimated 160,000 vehicles travel the stretch of highway daily, including more than 14,000 trucks, according to transportation officials. The urgency also fueled by concerns lengthy detours could impact the supply chain.
Yeah, and to ease some of those traffic concerns, officials have added extra cars to commuter trains. They've also made parking free at some mass transit lots. Now, the federal government has already made millions available for the rebuild project, but we know costs are only expected to soar. Valerie?
All right, incredible. Just a few weeks. George Solis, thanks so much.
Well, there was a frightening close call at Boston's Logan Airport, and it was caught on camera. Authorities say a United plane collided with a Delta flight on the tarmac while awaiting takeoff. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock has the latest on this latest scare. Hey, Sam, good morning.
Savannah, good morning. You can only imagine that would be a little unsettling if you were on board. Those two planes were in a parking area, Savannah, just waiting for clearance for takeoff. And now this appears to be the 8th time this year at U.S. airports the two planes have either collided or almost collided, prompting the FAA to take a closer look at what's behind these runway incursions.
Oh, it did.
This morning, the FAA is investigating yet another close call after authorities say the wing of a United Airlines flight clipped the tail of a Delta plane at Boston's Logan International Airport on Friday. Passenger video showing the United aircraft taxiing and slowly colliding with the tail of the parked Delta plane.
I knew it was going to happen. It looked like it. Yeah, it hit the other plane.
Rick Fredrickson and his 11-year-old son Daniel were on board the United flight bound for Newark when they saw the two planes inching closer.
I felt a thump that didn't seem right, like as soon as you felt it.
It was a little shocking. Everyone didn't know what was going on, and they were like, what happened? What happened?
Emergency crews quickly arrived, and the planes were towed back to their gates. The airlines say passengers were rebooked on new flights, and there were no reported injuries. According to the FAA, the two aircraft had been in a holding area waiting to get on the runway.
There's no one outside to direct you. It's up to the pilots to look around and see, to make sure that their wing clearance is not going to hit anything. And sometimes that can be difficult.
Friday's incident, just the latest in a string of close calls. Last week, a near miss in Minneapolis, after the FAA says an air traffic controller cleared a Delta flight to depart from runway 30 left.
At Delta, cross 30 left.
But then cleared an American Airlines plane to land on that same runway.
American 2406, clear to land, runway 30 left.
Realizing the mistake, the controller ordered the American flight to go around.
American 2406, I thought you were going on the right side, sir. You said left side. Sorry. American 2406, turn left heading 280.
But the American plane ended up flying directly above the Delta aircraft that was sitting on the runway. Federal authorities say they're now investigating that incident, too.
And the FAA did end up holding a nationwide safety summit back in March in which it decided to earmark some $100 million, Savannah, for roughly a dozen airports across the country, including MIA, which received $6 million. They talked about the fact they need to reconfigure some taxiways that can be confusing, also add lighting to the airfields and really focus on airfield operations. The agency also saying it's on track to add some 1,500 controllers. So far, it has cut down on these incursions, but it's still about 1 out of every 3 weeks. You see something like this.
Wow.
Savannah?
Yeah. Oof. Sam Brock, thank you so much.
Coming up on Morning News Now, a celebration of Juneteenth, a day when we commemorate black slaves in Texas finding out about emancipation 2 years after they were freed. We've got a quick history lesson for you later in the hour, plus a closer look at the food that helps shape a culture.
But first, we are on royal watch as King Charles celebrates his first Trooping the Color, as it's known. But it was Prince Louis who once again stole the show. We'll explain next. Welcome back. Well, new this morning, an investigation is underway after a U.S. Air Force Staff Sergeant was found dead at an Arizona lake. Officials say 33-year-old Staff Sergeant Corey Wade was first reported missing during a training exercise Wednesday. The New York native was based at the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base near Tucson, Arizona. After an exhaustive search, his body was found near Roosevelt Lake. Right now, investigators say the cause of death is not immediately clear, and Wade's death is under investigation. Now let's get to some international headlines, starting with new developments in the war in Ukraine.
NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman joins us now. Josh, good morning.
Good morning. Ukraine's military is now confirming that Russian report that the town of Pyatkhatka is now under Ukrainian control. The deputy defense minister of Ukraine saying that it's one of 8 settlements and 43 square miles liberated by Ukraine so far in the first 2 weeks of its counteroffensive. But so far, that counteroffensive does seem to be falling short of the overwhelming momentum that many of Ukraine's supporters had hoped they'd be seeing. And now to India, where at least 96 deaths have been reported during a heat wave in the country's 2 most populous states. Temperatures have reached 113 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity has been very thick in a region where many Indians are forced to work outdoors. But now there are some questions being raised about whether all of those deaths were heat-related or whether contaminated water possibly would have been a factor as well. And finally, to Ireland, where you could get paid about $92,000 to move to a gorgeous, lush island if you don't mind being cut off from the rest of the world. The Irish government says those cash grants are designed to lure more people to about 30 islands on the Atlantic coast of Ireland, where about nobody lives almost, in part because there are no bridges to those islands. But there are a lot of old abandoned homes on the islands, and so now Ireland hopes that this cash will attract people to come and buy those abandoned houses and fix them up. I don't know, for $92,000, I might consider living on a lush island, even if it was a little remote from everybody else. What do you got?
Yeah, really. I guess maybe they need to work on the transport, but it's pretty cool.
Kayak or something.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. Let's stay overseas again this morning now and talk about Great Britain's royal family and their busy weekend.
King Charles led the Trooping the Color ceremony for the first time since his coronation, and Prince William made a big announcement about homelessness. NBC News foreign correspondent Kelly Kobea joins us now from London with all of the details. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning. Yeah, it was a big weekend of celebrations here in London for the royal family and for the king. But of course, it was the youngest royals who grabbed all the attention on the king's big day. King Charles riding horseback for his first official birthday celebration as monarch over the weekend. The royal family stepped out on the Buckingham Palace balcony for a spectacular military flyover, with 5-year-old Prince Louis once again stealing the show, making faces. The palace posting a happy Father's Day message on social media with a picture of the king and both of his sons, a young Prince William and Prince Harry in Scotland, perhaps a gesture to his youngest son now living in the U.S., days after Spotify announced it was ending its $20 million podcast deal with Harry and Meghan. The palace also releasing this picture of a beaming Prince William with his 3 children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, for Father's Day. The Prince of Wales and heir to the throne announcing in a rare interview that he's planning to launch a really big project to tackle homelessness this month, telling the Sunday Times, "It's nerve-wracking, but I'm really excited. I've been waiting for the right time to do this." His mother, Princess Diana, took Prince William to a homeless shelter when he was 11.
She took him and Harry to quite a few homelessness organisations from a young age, and I think that has stayed with them.
The Prince of Wales has spent the night on the street and tried to go undercover selling a magazine that helps the homeless.
Enjoy your lunch.
Prince William says he's now thinking of when and how to expose his own children to the issue.
He said to me, he talks to them and says, you know, there are some people who need a little bit more help in life, and it's important you understand that, just as his mother, you know, showed him and Harry from a young age.
Prince William inherited a massive estate when the Queen died, 130,000 acres in southern England, and says he hopes to build low-income housing on some of the land with the goal of one day ending homelessness.
And there are more celebrations ahead this week, primarily because Prince William turns 41 on Wednesday, so he'll be celebrating his birthday. And Valerie, he said that he'll make more announcements, a more detailed announcement about this homelessness initiative by the end of the month. Valerie?
All right, Kelly, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Coming up as we continue our celebration of Juneteenth on this Monday morning, we'll take you to Texas, where a community is fighting to keep its cultural identity.
Yeah, our Tremaine Lee takes a closer look at what freedom truly means in 2023 next. You're watching Morning News Now.
It's been 2 years since Juneteenth became a federal holiday, but at the state level, governments vary considerably in whether they recognize it or not.
Yeah, according to the Pew Research Center, this year, 28 states and the District of Columbia are legally recognizing Juneteenth as a holiday. So that means government offices are closed and state workers have a paid day off. Last year, cities including New York and Los Angeles, as well as Phoenix, declared the day an official paid holiday, while other states like California, they're going to observe the day, but state offices are to remain open. Well, in Hawaii and North Dakota, Juneteenth is observed, but is not considered a state holiday. In Texas, though, Juneteenth has been celebrated as an official holiday since 1980. So speaking of Texas, we now want to go to a once thriving Black community that is now struggling to keep its identity.
The city of Galveston continues to fight for the true freedom that it was promised. NBC News correspondent Tremaine Lee has that story.
You're here on the southwest corner of 22nd and Strand, where the Juneteenth story began.
It's been 157 years since the very first Juneteenth celebration, here on the island of Galveston in Texas, where the last of America's enslaved Black people were finally freed. Sam Collins is the co-chair of the Juneteenth Legacy Project.
We're at the colored church on Broadway, where the Union soldiers would have moved through the city and posted the notice, General Order Number 3, on the door here.
General Order Number 3 required absolute equality, but for Galveston's Black community, equality has been anything but absolute.
People talk about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, but there were many communities that were successful outside of those stories of places that were destroyed. Galveston was one of those thriving communities.
He says low-paying jobs, a rising cost of living, young and middle-class Black folks fleeing for better opportunities elsewhere, all drained historic neighborhoods. And then, in 2008, a near-death blow to the Black community, Hurricane Ike.
Tonight, Galveston is a soaked and shattered disaster zone.
75% of Galveston's houses and other buildings were taken out by the storm, including nearly 600 units of public housing. The primarily Black residents who lived there had no choice but to relocate. Between 2000 and 2010, Galveston's Black population plummeted by 37%. The city was eventually forced by the federal government to bring some public housing units back. Then came the pandemic. As struggling families dislocated, Galveston drew in wealthy investors.
So many of the homes that used to be occupied by Black families are now short-term rentals.
Black families moving in?
No, I have almost never heard of any Black families moving in at all.
Generations of June Pulliam's family grew up in Galveston, in this century-old clapboard house by the Gulf.
I recognize this front porch.
Yes, that's the front porch of where we are now. This is my great-grandfather, Ralph Albert Skoll, who was 5 the year of Juneteenth.
Folks used to call this place Island of Color, a name that's faded with time.
I guess what's at stake is just the preservation of this very important history. They made homes for themselves. They educated themselves. They formed organizations.
I want to bring back black folks having some economic influence on the island.
Longtime resident Anthony Griffin is breathing new life into old black Galveston.
We want to put commercial development there, place a hotel on the other side of the street. We own 3 or 4 lots on the other side.
His plan? Buy up as much land as he can to house and employ families still fighting for the true freedom that was promised.
If you don't have economic opportunity, if you don't own land, if you're not able to participate fully in the American dream, you can't ever have absolute equality.
Thanks to Tremaine Lee for that report. Some Texans say storm insurance plays a big factor in Galveston's loss of black residents. They say people who can afford storm insurance will always be able to rebuild, but those who can't afford it are less likely to come back to the island. Now we have Dr. Dinah Ramey Berry, scholar of the enslaved and black women's history, joining us now with more on the history of Juneteenth. Dr. Berry, thank you for being with us this morning. Let's talk about what Juneteenth represents, not only for the black community, but its overall significance in America's history as well.
Well, Juneteenth really is a holiday that recognizes freedom. It recognizes the freedom of African Americans in the aftermath of slavery. And I think one of the things that we're trying to emphasize now as it's become a federal holiday in 2021 is that this was a holiday that celebrated the freedom of African Americans and the independence and the opportunities for African Americans to participate in citizenship in the aftermath of slavery.
So you just mentioned that this becomes this holiday in 2021 when President Biden signed this declaration and therefore a federal holiday. But as we talked about, there's still kind of some disparities across the country in terms of how it's recognized. That came a year after George Floyd died from police brutality. At that time, Black Lives Matter has sparked a movement that many historians say, I mean, we really haven't seen similar scale since the civil rights era. How do you think those events help to reignite these calls for change? And then also put in the context of all of that going on, the fact that finally Juneteenth becomes this federal holiday.
Absolutely. Juneteenth, there were people that were fighting for this to become a holiday all the way back to the 1970s. And we know this. It became a holiday, a state holiday in Texas in 1980. But African Americans and those that were formerly enslaved fought and celebrated Juneteenth as early as 1866. But I do think you're right. George Floyd was a significant turning point. The death of George Floyd, to see that an African American could be choked to death in broad daylight by an officer, was something that really changed the way people thought about African American freedom. And they saw for themselves that African Americans are still struggling to define themselves as human beings and also to be considered citizens of the United States.
You wrote an article in The Atlantic called The Truth About Freedom, and in it you discussed the history of black self-liberation, those who were enslaved, escaping their bondage and claiming their own freedom by fleeing, suing, or other means. Why is self-liberation an important part of our Juneteenth commemoration, and how does it draw parallels to the fight for equality that the black community is still facing today?
I think the idea of self-liberation that happened prior to 1863's Emancipation Proclamation, prior to the end of the Civil War, prior to Juneteenth, and prior to the 13th Amendment becoming ratified on December 6th of 1865, is very important because it shows that African Americans found ways to become free, to sue for their freedom, to purchase their freedom, to literally escape and self-liberate themselves by going to free territories, is an important aspect of us understanding American history and the quest for the inherent role that freedom plays in all of our lives. We also find that African Americans are still finding ways, just like the recent Supreme Court decision in Alabama about redistricting and voting rights, right? We know that voting is a major way that African Americans and any citizen in this country expresses their freedom and their participation in our government. And those are the same kinds of things that we're fighting for today.
Dr. Berry, while you're talking about self-liberation and people who had the strength and the courage to do this even before 1863 or 1865, remind us, just while we have you, as a historian, as a scholar, on those years, or the reason that this is the particular date that is Juneteenth, that is this celebration of freedom, it was because for years there were people in the United States who did not know that this was true for them. Walk us through kind of just those 2 years and what this day actually was, what happened on Juneteenth.
Many enslaved people in Texas said that they didn't know they had been free until they heard somebody say, quote, make a proclamation. They heard General Order Number 3 that was brought to their plantation communities. They heard from their uncles, from their cousins, from other Union officers that came in to tell them that slavery was over. June 19th marked that day for those that were enslaved in Texas. It wasn't ratified, as I mentioned, the 13th Amendment wasn't ratified until December. But to find out that you're free, some enslaved people literally walked off and left their plantation communities. Others went to find new houses. Others solidified their marriages. Some of them went to get an education. But the idea that freedom had come in their lifetime was something that they had thought about and fought for every single day that they were living before that.
So important to learn that history. Dr. Dinah Rama Berry, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you.
We very much do.
Thank you.
Our coverage of Juneteenth continues now with a look at some of the traditions of African Americans.
Because like any major holiday, Juneteenth is full of rich festivities that honor centuries of culture. That is through song, dance, and of course, food. Nicole A. Taylor, author of Red Birds and Watermelon, a cookbook for Juneteenth and Black celebrations, joins us now. Nicole, good morning. Thank you so much for being here. There is the cover of your gorgeous book. We appreciate you this morning.
Thanks for having me. Happy Juneteenth.
Absolutely. Happy Juneteenth. So we get to have some fun with some of this. So walk us through. I mean, I understand this is one of the first cookbooks, that maybe the only cookbook that really is specifically tied to Juneteenth. Is that right?
It's such an honor to have the first cookbook dedicated to the Juneteenth holiday.
Absolutely. And so tell us a little bit about what exactly is the food aspect of this culture and of this day.
I mean, when you go back and look at June 19th, 1865, we know that people rose up, they sang, they rejoiced, and they had beautiful food. The following year, newspapers say that that's when you started to see and hear and smell the barbecue, the smoke billowing through communities with ribs, with watermelon, with bread drinks, with buffets of cakes and pies. So we know that those foods are like essentials from the 1800s all the way to now.
What was the inspiration for this book, and why do you think it took so long for there to be a cookbook like this?
Oh, I think that there are a lot of families who definitely have been gathering their recipes and cooking the same things over and over. But I do think that in 2020, the tragic death or murder of George Floyd, you know, really cemented the urgency of cookbooks, of joy, of Black joy. And so I was inspired to write this book, or to move forward with writing this book. At that moment of the summer 2020, I knew that I wanted to create something that was joyful and that was like this declaration to go and gather with your family and friends and be happy, be proud and grateful for all of the sacrifices that generations of African Americans have done in this country. Yeah.
Oh, I love the focus on joy. I want to pull something up right now. I think we've got this. That's from your book, this very unique food pyramid that's sort of at the front of this. Do we have this? I think there it is. Tell us about some of the food featured on this pyramid and why you included it in your book. Walk us through this.
I mean, listen, we're all trying to figure out what to do when we get to the grocery store or the supermarket. So I wanted to create something that was super nifty and super fun for folks to like take a photo of it in the book and go through the grocery store and buy all of the foods or some of the foods that are mentioned in the book. So I put it in categories. You have the fruit, you have the vegetables, and then you have what I call accoutrements. So strawberries you need, plums, raspberries, watermelon you see in my book, and then you have garlic and cucumbers. These are all ingredients that people buy in the summertime or throughout the year, but very specific ingredients that are important when you're making recipes from watermelon and red birds.
Yeah, the staples for those foods.
Of course.
We know Texas is kind of the heart of Juneteenth. Are the recipes strictly Texas foods, or are there other regions represented?
It was super important for me to ground Texas. Texas is the birthplace of Juneteenth. But we also know that people from Texas, people all over the country, people all over the world are celebrating Juneteenth. So I made sure that I took foods that are traditional to African American culture and like flipped them on its head. So you find sweet potato spritz in this book. You find other ingredients like harissa. which is not traditional to Texas food. So I made sure to sprinkle in some culture and culture of other people and how we're all connected in this struggle for equality.
Awesome. Oh, I'm hungry.
Nicole, congratulations on your book, and thanks for being with us this morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy Juneteenth. We appreciate you coming in. Coming up, a terrifying and reportedly unprovoked bear attack over the weekend in rural Arizona that tragically left one man dead.
Why investigators say the bear attacked and how you can stay safe outdoors as temperatures heat up. This is Morning News Now. We're back with a tragic story from Arizona where a man drinking coffee on his property was fatally mauled by a black bear. Local officials say the attack was completely unprovoked and very rare. The last bear attack in the state was more than 10 years ago. NBC News national correspondent Miguel Almaguer has the latest.
Attacks like these are considered incredibly rare, and now authorities in Arizona are trying to determine exactly what may have provoked that bear to kill.
RP reporting that the neighbor was being attacked by a bear.
In what's being described as a vicious, unprovoked attack, authorities say on Friday in this rural area of northern Arizona, an adult male black bear mauled a 66-year-old man to death. Witnesses telling sheriff's deputies Stephen Jackson was having a cup of coffee on his property where he had begun building a cabin when the bear approached him and attacked. Jackson's screams heard by neighbors who tried to distract the bear and stop the brutal scene.
There was honking horns, different things that they were doing. There was no success in stopping the attack.
The bear dragged Jackson about 75 yards down a nearby hill before one neighbor arrived with a rifle.
The bear has been shot.
The bear is down. I have visual on it. It's not moving.
The neighbor killed the bear, but it was too late for Jackson, who died from his injuries.
Nothing jumped out at us as being obvious of why this occurred or what brought the bear to this location. This attack appears to be predatory in nature.
Adult male black bears can weigh up to 600 pounds, but despite their intimidating size, attacks are incredibly rare. With about 300,000 living in the U.S., there's only about one fatal attack per year. Experts think the animal involved in this fatal run-in may have been in search of food or felt it needed to protect its surroundings.
It could be this terrible situation where the man, unbeknownst to him, was building property in the bear's territory, and the bear is trying to defend that.
Now, with summer approaching, encounters may become more common as bears awake from hibernation and roam for food, and humans head outdoors.
Experts actually say black bears are the least aggressive species. They say if you encounter a black bear while out in the wilderness, it's best to simply back away, raise your voice, and make yourself appear as big as possible. Back to you.
All right, tragic story. Miguel Almaguer, thank you so much.
It really is. Good tips there, though. Well, now to a story of one couple's shared passion for art and their efforts to save a city's legacy. NBC's Jacob Soboroff has their story.
Hey guys, I am so impressed with these two entrepreneurs. They met a decade ago and they've discovered amazing ways to repurpose materials that other people simply might throw away. On any given day, you can hear the buzz of woodwork.
So this is the wood shop where all the magic happens.
Art created from salvaged material found in wrecked Detroit buildings at this 24,000 square foot warehouse, once an old car dealership.
So in here is the place to paint all the cars.
Now a showroom and wood shop owned by Bo Shepard and her partner in life and business, Kyle Dubé.
These are our Ella tables. It's made out of salvaged barn flooring from like local Metro Detroit barns that have fallen.
This is like the first coat.
The two are excited about their next big project nearby, which they call the Chateau Beaufait. Beaufait from the name of the street it sits on.
This is the future home sweet home, huh?
That's it.
Yeah, this is the dream home.
Chateau for what they see beyond the boarded up windows and falling bricks.
Structurally a little compromised, but if you look past that, it's beautiful.
Bo Shepard and Kyle Dubé are the owners of Woodward Throwbacks, a passion-turned-business built on salvaged materials from the streets of Detroit. The two met each other 10 years ago at an abandoned park cleanup, both on bikes. Where did the passion for restoration come from?
That kind of something that happened organically for myself and I think Bo as well.
Me and Kyle loved biking and exploring the city. And back then we noticed that there was just so much discarded material, construction debris, just vintage antiques. And so we were like, hey, we should build something for ourselves using the materials.
When they started, the Motor City was going through hard times. After declaring bankruptcy in 2013, over 80,000 homes were abandoned. What other people might call trash, you look at it and think what?
Possibilities.
Possibilities. Yeah, or just something that we can completely transform.
Kyle's an artist who took woodshop in school. Bo, a designer who went to school in Detroit for car interior design and worked with her father, a building contractor. They started out selling pieces they made at fairs. Then the big box stores came knocking at their door. When did this go from a passion to a business?
Probably within the year of starting. What we were doing a lot then is little home decor, like wall signs and bottle openers. And we started going to the local farmers market, and we did really well and kept just kind of hey, there might be something here. There's plenty of resources for materials.
There was a lot of texture and honest wear in what we were making, and we've always told the Detroit story.
They showed me some of their reclaimed finds. Even this is reclaimed?
Yeah.
So this is salvage chalkboard that we got out of a DPS high school.
This came from a Detroit public school?
Yeah.
Yes.
So this literally would have been in a landfill had you guys not grabbed it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With bigger goals in mind, they bought this Detroit house for $6,500. Yep, $6,500.
It was an eyesore in the neighborhood, and we're just well, we never fully deconstructed an entire house, saving all the materials.
After rehabbing it themselves, they sold it for $410,000. It really is a transformation, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to remember what it looked like when we bought it.
Yes, the transformation it's pretty great.
But in a city where gentrification and flipping can be dirty words, what you do is anything but flipping.
And we're doing the complete opposite. It took us 3 years, and we spent 3 times our budget on it.
It's we're buying this house, one, save it, restore it. And we also wanted to show people this is how you can renovate a house in the city and still give it so much character, so much soul.
Bo and Kyle just recently closed on another dilapidated Detroit property. They're again planning to renovate it using reclaimed materials. They are coming out with a book next year that features a collection of their sustainable designs. It's going to show people how to turn salvage or reclaimed material into home decor and furniture. They are so cool. Back to you guys.
All right, Jacob, awesome story. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Coming up on Morning News Now, the enduring legacy of one unlikely literary protagonist, a bossy pigeon.
After the break, Joe catches up with the author of one of the most beloved children's stories in recent history. That is up next. Stick around. Welcome back. The U.S. Open had a nail-biting finale yesterday. Get this, the underdog, Wyndham Clark, held off Rory McIlroy at Los Angeles Country Club to win his first major title. The nail-biting game denied McIlroy the chance to break his run of 9 years without a major win. Well, Clark dedicated his win to his mom, who told her son to play big before she passed away from breast cancer. He says it's a mantra that has stuck with him ever since. Love Rory, but it is fun to see an underdog win.
Yeah, and apparently that mantra worked.
Yeah, I know.
Good
That's
for him.
awesome. Good to see.
We end this hour with a beloved children's book character and the author behind it.
Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus turns 20 this month, and to celebrate, our very own Joe Fryer sat down with best-selling and award-winning children's book author Mo Willems.
Can I have a glass of water?
No.
This year, the literary world is celebrating 20 years of The Pigeon. First name The, last name Pigeon. A beloved children's book character, even if he is a little bossy.
The pigeon has wants. The pigeon has needs. And the pigeon does not know the difference between the two of those things.
Mo Willems is the author-cartoonist who first gave voice to the pigeon in 2003 with the award-winning book Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus. It chronicles the persistent pigeon's push to take the wheel as readers resoundingly reply,
No!
I was by no means assured that a book about a rat with wings talking directly to kids and making them yell no at the top of their lungs was going to be something I would get to make a career out of.
What is it about the pigeon that has endured for so long, do you think?
I know that for myself, I am always trying to make 49% of the book, and I want the audience to make 51%.
To Willems, books are an invitation, a spark, a starting point for kids and grown-ups.
I am more concerned about the play afterwards. What happens when they finish reading? Do they want to read again? Do they want to make their own stories? That is what excites me.
It likely won't surprise you that Willems began his career as a writer and animator on Sesame Street before shifting to books.
Does it amaze you just how many books for children there are?
I think it's great because there's so many different types of children.
He has written more than 70 books with characters grown in what he calls his idea garden, from the duo of Elephant and Piggy to the quiet Knuffle Bunny, a story inspired by Willems' own child, Trix.
It's a very special time when a grown-up and a kid are reading together. It's very intimate, and it's an opportunity for the kid to bond with the grown-up.
During the pandemic, Willems hosted lunch doodles.
Kind of looks like an ice cream cone.
More recently, he created a comedy opera with renowned soprano Renee Fleming.
Opera might be the most adult thing I can think of.
In some ways, but it's similar because they yell. They have emotions, and they tell you directly how they feel.
Willems also has a new pigeon book for adults filled with pigeon wisdom and, like many of his books, a whimsical surprise.
Now you have a pigeon mask, some other thing that rewards rereading. A picture book does not get read. A novel gets read. A picture book gets read 1 billion times.
After 20 years, the pigeon still can't drive the bus, but he and Mo can keep taking us on some amazing adventures.
All right, our thanks to our Joe, of course, for that, and also to Mo Willems for the hundreds of hours of happy reading for parents and kids.
More than 70 books.
I know, so cool. And what a great point there. Picture books do get read and read and read to find a little surprise like that mask.
Well, that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.